The trauma bay doors slammed open hard enough to shake the glass. 2 paramedics rushed a blood-covered man through the corridor, while hospital security struggled to hold back reporters outside the emergency entrance. "GSW to the abdomen," one medic shouted. "Possible internal bleed. Blood pressure dropping." The surgeons moved immediately, but the older travel nurse standing beside the medication cart didn't. She stayed quiet. No panic. No questions. One of the attending surgeons glanced at her temporary badge and scoffed. "Try not to get in the way, sweetheart." She simply stepped aside. Then the wounded captain on the gurney grabbed the surgeon's wrist with surprising force. Weak, pale, barely conscious, but focused. His eyes locked on the travel nurse. And despite the blood soaking through his uniform, the Special Forces captain straightened his arm just enough to give her a formal salute. The entire trauma bay went silent. Because whatever they thought that woman was, they were wrong. Rain hammered against the ambulance bay hard enough to blur the city lights beyond the emergency entrance. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, the overnight trauma staff moved with the tired rhythm of people already running behind schedule. Stretchers rolled across polished floors. Phones rang unanswered for several seconds too long. Monitors chirped in overlapping patterns from crowded patient rooms. It had already been a bad night. Downtown protests had turned violent an hour earlier. Police scanners reported fires, broken storefronts, and multiple casualties moving toward nearby hospitals. Every emergency department in the district was preparing for overflow. In Trauma Bay 3, Dr. Victor Hale stripped off a pair of bloody gloves and tossed them into a disposal bin. "We're down 2 nurses already," he muttered. "Fantastic timing." A younger surgical resident glanced at the staffing board. Administration found a travel nurse. Hale scoffed. "At midnight." The resident shrugged. "She just checked in." Another surgeon laughed while reviewing scans on a tablet. Probably someone chasing overtime. The doors near the nursing station opened quietly. Most people did not notice her at first. She stepped inside carrying a weathered black duffel bag and a folded rain jacket tucked beneath one arm. Mid-40s, maybe older. Dark hair tied back neatly. No makeup. No jewelry except a plain silver watch scratched around the edges. Her temporary ID badge hung from a blue lanyard. Evelyn Carter. Travel RN. Nothing about her stood out. That was the strange part. In emergency medicine, exhausted people usually carried their stress openly. They rushed. They apologized. They talked too much. Evelyn did none of those things. She simply stopped near the station and observed the floor for several seconds. Not nervously. Carefully. Her eyes moved once across the exits. Supply locations. Trauma rooms. Security desk. Elevator access. Then she approached the charge nurse. "Where do you need me?" Her voice was calm enough that the surrounding noise seemed to lower around it. Charge nurse Miriam Lopez handed over a clipboard. "You worked trauma before?" "Yes." "Level 1?" "Yes." Lopez nodded quickly, distracted by 3 problems at once. "Good." Bay 2 lost a nurse. "You're there." Evelyn accepted the assignment without another word. One of the younger nurses leaned toward another as Evelyn walked away. "She does not look like trauma." "No," the other whispered back. "She looks like somebody's aunt." At Bay 2, Dr. Hale barely looked up from a chart. "You the traveler?" "Yes, doctor." "You familiar with our protocols?" "I'll adapt." The answer irritated him for reasons he could not explain. He pointed toward a medication cart. "Just stay close to senior staff tonight." Evelyn nodded once. No argument. No pride. That somehow made the dismissal feel heavier. Across the ER, paramedics rushed in a teenager with chest trauma from shattered glass downtown. Staff flooded around the stretcher immediately. Blood. Oxygen masks. Sharp commands. Evelyn moved silently into position beside the bed. She handed instruments over before surgeons asked. Adjusted 4 flow rates without hesitation. Stabilized the patient's arm before a resident even realized the line had slipped. No wasted motion. Dr. Hale noticed it gradually. Not because she was flashy. Because she was precise. During the chaos, one monitor began giving inconsistent oxygen readings. A resident frowned at the screen. Sensor issue. Evelyn glanced once at the patient. No, she said quietly. Partial airway obstruction. The resident looked confused. Dr. Hale checked manually. She was right. A blood clot blocked the airway tubing. The room shifted instantly as staff corrected it. The patient's oxygen stabilized. Nobody thanked her. But nobody ignored her after that, either. Hours passed. The storm outside worsened. Additional police units arrived near the hospital entrance after reports of armed suspects moving through nearby districts. Security officers began locking secondary access points. Near 2 in the morning, Evelyn stood alone briefly near a supply cabinet restocking trauma kits. A hospital orderly approached carrying linens. You military? She looked at him. No. You move like military. Evelyn folded gauze carefully into a drawer. Lots of trauma nurses move carefully. The orderly nodded awkwardly and left. But he kept glancing back afterward. Because it was not just careful movement. It was awareness. She never turned corners tightly. Never let her back face open hallways. Never seemed surprised by sudden noise. Around 2:17 a.m., the ambulance bay doors burst open again. This time the atmosphere changed immediately. Not louder. Quieter. 3 black SUVs rolled into the secured entrance outside. No police markings. No city identification. Armed men exited first, scanning the perimeter before the rear doors even opened. Hospital security froze. Then came the stretcher. The wounded man lying on it wore torn civilian clothing over visible military-grade body armor. Blood soaked through layered bandages across his abdomen. One of the medics shouted ahead urgently. Critical trauma patient. GSW. Surgical team now. Behind them, more armed personnel entered the corridor with controlled urgency instead of panic. Professional. Federal. Dangerous. The entire ER seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Hale stepped forward immediately. Who is this? No names, one agent replied sharply. You save his life. That's your job. As the stretcher rushed toward Trauma Bay 1, Evelyn looked up from the medication counter. For the first time all night, her expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. And as the unconscious wounded man rolled past her position, his eyes opened for barely half a second. Long enough to see her standing there. Long enough for the fear in his face to disappear completely. The trauma doors slammed shut behind the convoy team. Rainwater streaked across the floor beneath their boots as armed federal personnel spread through the emergency department with quiet efficiency. They did not shout. They did not flash badges unnecessarily. That made them more unsettling. One agent moved directly toward hospital security and began issuing instructions in a low voice. Another positioned himself beside the elevators leading toward surgical recovery. Nobody explained anything. Inside Trauma Bay 1, the wounded man was transferred onto the operating table while monitors screamed warning tones across the room. Pressure is crashing, a resident warned. Prep for rapid transfusion, Dr. Hale snapped. The patient's shirt was cut open completely. Multiple scars crossed his torso beneath the fresh wound. Some old. Some surgical. One looked like shrapnel damage healed years earlier. Hale frowned. Military. Nobody answered him. The captain's face had gone pale beneath the harsh trauma lights. Blood loss was severe. A round had entered low near the right abdomen and likely fragmented internally. One of the federal agents stepped closer. You save him, he said quietly. Whatever you need, you get. Dr. Hale looked irritated already. Then get your people out of my trauma bay. The agent held his stare for a long moment before stepping back. Evelyn entered silently carrying additional blood units. A younger nurse whispered near the medication station. Who are these people? No idea. CIA. Maybe military intelligence. Evelyn said nothing. She checked the blood tubing personally before connecting it. No hesitation. No wasted movement. The wounded captain stirred slightly as fresh blood entered the line. His breathing became uneven. "Daniel," one medic said carefully near his ear. "Stay with us." So the staff finally had a first name. Daniel. Dr. Hale pressed around the abdominal wound while reviewing scans appearing on the overhead monitor. "Round fragmented after entry," he muttered. "Possible liver involvement." The resident beside him swallowed hard. "Can he survive that?" "He survives if people stop talking." Across the room, Evelyn noticed one of the agents standing too close to the sterile equipment table. His jacket concealed a shoulder holster poorly beneath wet fabric. "Step back 3 feet," she said calmly. The room paused. The agent looked at her with immediate irritation. "What? You contaminated the sterile perimeter." "You giving orders now?" "No," Evelyn replied evenly. "I'm protecting your captain from infection." Something changed in the agent's expression. Not anger. Assessment. He stepped back without another word. Dr. Hale noticed that too. The travel nurse should have been intimidated. Most temporary staff became nervous around federal authority. Evelyn did not even blink. Another surgeon entered carrying fresh imaging reports. "Operating room 2 is prepped." "Good," Hale said. "Move him." As the team repositioned the gurney, the captain's eyes opened weakly again. Disoriented at first, then focused. His gaze moved across the room until it stopped on Evelyn. Everything about him changed. The panic left first. Then the tension in his shoulders. Even through pain and medication, recognition settled into his expression with complete certainty. Evelyn noticed. She looked back at him only briefly. A silent exchange passed between them too fast for others to understand. Dr. Hale kept speaking while adjusting gloves. "We'll stabilize in surgery. If the liver's shredded." His words stopped abruptly, because Daniel Mercer had suddenly grabbed his wrist. Weakly, but firmly enough to interrupt the entire room. The captain ignored everyone else. His eyes stayed fixed on Evelyn. One of the agents stepped forward immediately. "Captain." Mercer released Hale slowly. Then, with visible effort, he raised his trembling hand toward Evelyn. Not reaching, not pointing, saluting. A formal military salute. Precise despite blood loss. The trauma bay went completely silent. Even the younger residents understood enough to recognize what they had just seen. Dr. Hale stared between them. "You know this nurse?" Mercer's breathing remained shallow, but his answer came clearly. "Yes, sir." Not to Hale. To her. The words landed strangely inside the room. Respect. Deep respect. From a man surrounded by armed federal personnel. Evelyn stepped closer calmly and lowered his hand before Strain reopened the bleeding near his abdomen. "You should conserve strength," she said quietly. Mercer gave the smallest nod, like receiving instruction. One of the agents beside the door suddenly straightened. He looked at Evelyn more carefully now. Not as hospital staff. As something else. Dr. Hale removed his gloves in frustration. "What exactly is happening here?" "No idea," another surgeon muttered. But uncertainty had already spread through the room. The travel nurse no longer looked temporary. She looked contained. Controlled. Like someone deliberately pretending to be smaller than she was. Mercer's eyes drifted shut again as medication pulled him downward. Before losing consciousness fully, he spoke one final sentence. Barely above a whisper. "She kept us alive." Dr. Hale frowned. "What does that mean?" Mercer never answered. The anesthesia took him completely seconds later. Outside the trauma bay, tension spread through the hospital corridors. More security personnel arrived. Several waiting rooms were quietly evacuated without explanation. Near the nurses' station, Charge Nurse Lopez approached Evelyn carefully. "You know him." Evelyn finished documenting medication dosages before answering. "I treated military trauma overseas years ago." That was not normal recognition. "No," Evelyn admitted softly. "It was not." Before Lopez could ask another question, one of the federal agents approached. Tall. Broad shoulders. Late 50s. The others moved subtly when he walked by. Leadership. He stopped in front of Evelyn. For a moment neither spoke. Then the man glanced at her temporary badge. Travel nurse. Yes. His eyes narrowed slightly, but not with suspicion. More like disbelief. Finally he gave a quiet nod. Captain Mercer will survive longer because you were here tonight. Evelyn returned to organizing supplies. He'll survive because your surgeons are competent. The man studied her another second. Then he lowered his voice. You always avoid credit. Yes. A distant alarm suddenly echoed somewhere deeper in the hospital. Not medical. Security. The federal agent turned immediately toward the sound. At the far end of the quarry, the security alarm stopped after only a few seconds. That made it worse. Inside hospitals, alarms usually ended with explanations. Equipment malfunction. Wrong access card. Electrical issue. But nobody explained this one. The federal personnel in the corridor became visibly sharper afterward. Hands moved closer to concealed weapons. Conversations turned quieter. More deliberate. Near Trauma Bay 1, Dr. Hale scrubbed blood from his forearms at the sink outside surgery. Tell me somebody has answers now, he muttered. Nobody did. A surgical resident approached holding updated lab results. Mercer's pressure stabilized temporarily. Good. Maybe we get lucky. The resident hesitated. Who do you think that nurse is? Hale dried his hands irritably. She's a travel nurse. That captain saluted her. Hale stopped moving for half a second. Yes, he admitted. I noticed. Across the hallway, Evelyn sat briefly at a computer terminal updating medication records. Her expression remained neutral despite the attention now drifting constantly toward her. Nurses whispered nearby. One orderly quietly searched her name online during break and found almost nothing. No social media. No hospital profile history. No conference records. Just scattered travel assignments across different states over several years. Temporary work. Always temporary. The older federal officer returned from the security desk carrying a radio. Ma'am. Several staff members looked up immediately at the word. Ma'am. Not miss. Not nurse. Evelyn stood slowly. Yes. We may need access to additional surgical space. You expecting more casualties? The officer paused too long before answering. Possibly. Dr. Hale approached before the conversation could continue. If your people know something, now would be a good time. The officer's jaw tightened. There are concerns the attack on Captain Mercer was coordinated. What does that mean exactly? It means the people who shot him may attempt confirmation. The hallway went still. One nurse whispered, Confirmation. The officer looked directly at Hale. They may come here. A cold silence spread through the surgical corridor. Hospitals were supposed to be protected spaces. Neutral ground. But everyone suddenly understood that protection meant very little to trained people willing to ignore it. Hale ran a hand across his face. How many? We don't know. Local police. En route. Estimated time. The officer did not answer immediately. That answer was enough. Too far away. Evelyn spoke calmly before panic could spread. How secure are your outer perimeters? The officer looked at her carefully. Partial lockdown. Loading dock sealed. East stairwell covered. North service entrance. He frowned slightly. Maintenance access. Yes. We posted someone there. That corridor connects directly to oxygen control and backup generators. Now the officer's expression changed completely. Because she was right. And she had identified it instantly without maps. He grabbed his radio immediately. Unit 3, verify north service position now. Static answered. Then silence. The officer's face hardened. Unit 3, respond. Nothing. Evelyn was already moving. Not running. Walking quickly toward the supply hallway beside radiology. Dr. Hale stared after her. Where is she going? The federal officer followed immediately. Seal that corridor. Suddenly, the emergency department shifted from tension into motion. Security personnel rushed toward access doors. Nurses moved patients away from hallway rooms. Somebody locked the pediatric wing automatically. Near the north maintenance corridor, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above concrete flooring rarely seen by patients. The area smelled like cleaning chemicals and machine oil. Evelyn stopped near the corner. Listened. The officer behind her drew his sidearm carefully. "You hear something?" "Yes." "What?" "Nothing." He looked confused. "That's the problem. Hospitals always made noise. Ventilation. Equipment. Footsteps." This corridor had gone silent. Evelyn's eyes moved once toward the ceiling camera above the intersection. The indicator light was dark. Disabled. "Get your people back," she said quietly. The officer immediately keyed his radio. Before he could speak, a maintenance door farther down the corridor opened slowly. A man stepped through wearing hospital scrubs. Wrong posture. Wrong shoes. Not hospital staff. His eyes locked onto the armed officer instantly, then shifted toward Evelyn. Recognition flashed across his face for one dangerous second. Not surprise. Recognition. The man's hand moved beneath his scrub top. The officer raised his weapon immediately. "Don't move." But Evelyn spoke first. "Wait." The man froze. His breathing changed slightly as he stared at her, like he knew her voice. Evelyn stepped forward once. Controlled. "You're early," she said quietly. The disguised intruder looked shaken now. Not by the gun. By her. Behind them, additional federal agents flooded into the corridor with weapons raised. The intruder glanced toward the exits rapidly. Calculating. Then he bolted backward through the maintenance door instead of attacking. "Move!" the officer shouted. Agents surged forward in pursuit. But by the time they reached the exterior loading corridor beyond the door, the intruder had vanished into storm shadows outside. Only rain remained. Heavy. Cold. Endless. Back inside the corridor, the federal officer stared at Evelyn. "How did you know?" She looked at the disabled security camera overhead. "He was never here for civilians." "You recognized him?" "No," she answered carefully. Then, after a pause, "He recognized me." The officer studied her in silence. Somewhere deeper inside the hospital, Captain Mercer was being wheeled toward surgery while armed men closed in around the building. And for the first time that night, the federal teams protecting him no longer looked fully in control. Because the quiet travel nurse clearly understood the threat before they did. The hospital doors sealed with a heavy mechanical click that echoed through the emergency wing. Not metaphorically. Physically. Magnetic locks engaged across secondary corridors. Security shutters dropped over controlled access points. Elevators were frozen on medical override. St. Gabriel Medical Center shifted into full lockdown status. Inside Trauma Bay 1, the surgical team barely noticed at first. They were focused on saving Captain Mercer's life, while anesthesia and controlled ventilation kept him stable enough for transfer into surgery. But outside the operating room, the atmosphere changed completely. Phones stopped working in some sections of the building. Radios began to fail intermittently. And security cameras along the north corridor remained dark. Dr. Hale stepped out of scrubs briefly, irritation replaced by tension. "This is not standard protocol," he said sharply. A hospital administrator rushed toward him holding a tablet. "We initiated lockdown per federal request." Federal request doesn't mean we shut down half the hospital. It does if armed threats are confirmed inside the perimeter. Hale froze slightly. "Inside." The administrator didn't answer directly. That silence was confirmation enough. Across the corridor, Evelyn stood beside a supply cabinet, restocking trauma kits with deliberate precision. No panic. No urgency in her movements. Only structure. Charge Nurse Lopez approached her carefully. "People are saying there are intruders in the building." "Yes," Evelyn said. Lopez hesitated. "That's it. That's your reaction." Evelyn closed the kit and turned slightly. "My reaction is prevention. Panic comes later. That's not normal." Evelyn met her eyes. It should be. A distant crash echoed somewhere above them. A metal cart striking a wall, followed by shouting. Security personnel immediately moved toward the sound. The hospital shifted again, from controlled emergency response into fragmented defense. Dr. Hale re-entered the trauma bay quickly. "Or 2 is ready. We're moving Mercer now." One of the federal agents immediately stepped forward. "Route is compromised." "What do you mean, compromised?" "Maintenance access is active. We lost contact with North Corridor Unit." Hale exhaled sharply. "So what now?" The agent looked toward Evelyn without meaning to. That alone caught Hale's attention. Evelyn spoke without looking up from her preparations. "You reroute through imaging corridor." The agent frowned. "That path passes 3 unsecured junctions." "Yes," Evelyn said calmly, "but it avoids the oxygen control access point." Hale narrowed his eyes. "You know this hospital layout better than we do." "I study emergency facilities," she replied. "Why?" No answer came immediately. A silence formed that nobody liked. Then another alarm attempted to trigger and failed halfway through its tone. "Cut off. Power fluctuations." Evelyn finally looked up. "They are testing access points," she said. The federal agent stiffened. "Testing? Before breach." The word landed heavily. "Breach." Hale grabbed a chart from the counter. "If they breach surgery, we lose him mid-operation." Evelyn stepped closer. "No," she said. "You lose him if you panic and move too fast." The surgical resident blinked. "That's contradictory." "It's not," Evelyn replied. "You slow transport, keep distance from blind corners, and maintain sterile continuity." The federal agent looked at her again. "You're speaking like tactical medicine." Evelyn didn't respond, because she had already moved on to checking supply weights and door clearances. Dr. Hale stared at her now differently. Less dismissal, more calculation. "Who trained you?" he asked. Evelyn paused briefly. "No one you would know." That answer should have ended the conversation. It did not, because outside the trauma bay doors, shouting erupted again. This time closer. Security officers appeared in the hallway, backing up while scanning corners with drawn weapons. "Contact in West Service Hall," one of them shouted. "We've got movement." The hospital immediately reacted. Patients were pulled deeper into rooms. Monitors were wheeled into safer zones. Nurses guided families away from windows and hallways. Evelyn moved instantly toward the trauma bay door. The federal agent followed. "You're going where?" "Where I'm needed." "That's not your assignment." Evelyn stopped at the door. For the first time, her tone shifted slightly. Not louder, just firmer. "Your assignment is to protect the captain. My assignment is to keep this hospital functioning long enough for that to matter." Before he could respond, she stepped into the corridor. The lights flickered overhead. Emergency red strobes activated intermittently, casting unstable shadows across walls. Down the hall, 2 security officers retreated quickly while signaling. "Multiple hostiles moving low." "Repeat, North Wing breach suspected." Evelyn observed the corridor once. Not the people. The structure. The timing of movement. The sound spacing. Then she spoke into her radio calmly. "Close junction 4 and 6. Do not engage." The security officer snapped back. "Who is this?" "Do it." A pause. Then confusion. Then compliance. Doors ahead of the intruders began locking in sequence. Not fast enough to trap them, but enough to redirect them. Slow them. Force decisions. Dr. Hale appeared behind her in the corridor, breath slightly faster now. "What are you doing?" "Controlling flow." "That's not how hospitals work." "It is when they are under attack." A loud metallic impact echoed from the far end of the hallway. Something hit a door hard enough to bend it inward. Then again. A third impact. The intruders were forcing entry. Federal agents rushed toward the sound. Evelyn did not. She moved in the opposite direction. toward an auxiliary panel near the wall. She opened it and studied internal routing for less than 3 seconds. Then she spoke quietly. "Cut power to corridor lighting 3. Hale snapped immediately. "Why would we blind ourselves?" "Because they are using sightlines." The federal agent from earlier arrived, breathing harder now. "We can't keep losing ground like this." Evelyn looked at him directly. "You already lost ground when they entered without resistance. Now you control where they go next." Another explosion of sound came from the far corridor. A door gave way. Footsteps rushed inside. Fast. Confident. The breach had begun. Evelyn closed the panel gently. Then turned. "Move all patients out of imaging wing," she said. "Now." Hale hesitated for the first time. Because, despite disbelief, the imaging wing lights went out first. Not all at once. One section at a time, like the hospital itself was being carefully dismantled by invisible hands. Emergency generators kicked in with a low mechanical hum, but they powered only critical zones. Hallways became unevenly lit, bright in one stretch, completely dark in the next. That imbalance created fear faster than silence ever could. In the trauma corridor, nurses moved patients out of imaging overflow rooms as instructed. Some were still attached to monitors. Others were being stabilized mid-transfer. Dr. Hale watched the evacuation unfold with growing frustration. "This is turning into chaos," he said. Evelyn stood near the junction where 2 corridors split. "It's controlled chaos," she replied. "That's not a thing. It is when you reduce variables instead of increasing them." A loud crash echoed from deeper in the imaging wing. Metal against metal. Followed by shouting that stopped abruptly. Everyone in the corridor froze for half a second. Then Evelyn spoke. "Keep moving." No raised voice. No urgency in tone. But people moved anyway. Even Hale noticed it. Not obedience. Trust under pressure. A junior nurse stumbled while pushing a monitor stand. Tubing nearly disconnected from a patient. Evelyn stepped in without breaking stride. She corrected the line with one hand and stabilized the stand with the other. No pause. No acknowledgement. She kept walking. The nurse stared after her. "What was that?" she whispered. Nobody answered. Because there was no time. In the surgical prep zone, Captain Mercer was being transferred toward OR2. His condition was stable only because everything around him was being artificially controlled: blood pressure support, oxygen regulation, surgical timing. But stability in trauma was always temporary. One mistake would end it. Federal agents positioned themselves at both ends of the corridor leading to surgery. One spoke into his radio. "We are losing visibility in West Wing." Static answered. Another agent looked toward Evelyn as she re-entered the corridor. "You said lighting 3. We complied." They adjusted immediately. "Yes," she said. "They adapted faster than expected." Evelyn stopped near the wall, looking at a floor plan posted near emergency exits. "They are not improvising," she said. "What does that mean?" Hale asked. "It means they studied the building." The federal agent narrowed his eyes. "How do you know that?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed once at the map. "They avoided camera blind spots. They disabled North Corridor first. Then tested oxygen access." Her finger moved slightly. "Now they are moving toward surgical access routes." Silence followed. Because that pattern was not random. It was structured. Hale spoke slowly. "That's military planning." "Yes." The federal agent stepped closer. "Whose military?" Evelyn closed the map cover. "Not ours." A distant metallic echo came from the far end of the imaging wing again. Closer this time. Followed by footsteps. Faster. Clearer. Dr. Hale instinctively reached for the radio. "We need backup in imaging corridor now." The federal agent raised a hand. "Already requested." But there was a delay. Too long. Evelyn looked toward the corridor entrance. "They are here," she said. And then she moved. Not running. Not rushing. Positioning. She guided 2 nurses backward without touching them, only signaling direction. "Take patients through East Bypass," she said. "That route is blocked," one nurse responded. "It is not blocked yet." That distinction mattered, because time had not finished collapsing. The first intruder appeared at the far end of the corridor. Then another. Then 3 more. They moved with discipline. Not shouting. Not panicking. Their weapons stayed low but ready. Federal agents immediately raised rifles. "Stop right there." The intruders did not respond. Instead, they shifted formation slightly, covering angles. Evelyn observed them carefully. Not their weapons. Their spacing. Their coordination. One of them tilted his head slightly when he saw her. Just a fraction. But enough. Recognition again. Dr. Hale noticed. "You know them too?" he asked sharply. Evelyn's answer came quietly. "No." Then, after a pause, "They know me." That silence was heavier than any gunfire. A federal agent fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Last warning. The intruders did not retreat. They advanced 1 step, then stopped again, like waiting for instruction. Evelyn stepped forward slightly into the corridor's centerline. The federal agent immediately reacted. "Get back." But she didn't. Instead, she spoke calmly. "You are tracking the wrong target." The lead intruder finally spoke. Not loudly. Not aggressively. "Stand down, Carter." The corridor went completely still. Even the alarms felt distant. Dr. Hale turned slowly toward her. "Carter," he repeated. Evelyn did not react. But something in her posture changed. Very slightly. Like a door being held shut from the inside. The federal agent whispered, "That's your name." No answer. The intruder took another step forward. "We were not sent for the captain," he said. "We were sent for confirmation." Evelyn's voice remained steady. "You won't get it here." The intruder's gaze sharpened. "Then you should not be here either." Tension tightened instantly. Federal rifles aimed. Hospital staff froze behind equipment carts and walls. Dr. Hale realized something slowly. This was no longer a hospital incident. It was containment. Of her. Evelyn looked at the corridor once. Then made a decision. "Move the patients," she said quietly. Nobody moved immediately, because they were waiting for permission from authority. But authority had just fractured in front of them. She repeated it once. "Now." This time they moved. The intruders shifted forward again. And Evelyn finally stepped sideways, not retreating, not attacking. Positioning herself between them and the surgical wing. Not as a soldier. Not as a nurse. But as a barrier that had decided it would not break tonight. Behind her, Captain Mercer's life was minutes away from surgery. And the people coming down the corridor were no longer guessing. They were confirming something. Something only she could answer. The surgical wing doors did not break open immediately. They tested them first. A controlled pressure against reinforced glass. A second impact against the locking seam. A third, stronger strike that made the frame tremble but not fail. Inside, the corridor beyond door 2 fell into a tense silence. Captain Mercer was already on the operating table. Anesthesia maintained a fragile balance while surgeons prepared for abdominal repair. Blood units lined the wall. Instruments were arranged in strict order. Every second mattered. Dr. Hale stood at the scrub sink, hands trembling slightly for the first time that night. "We cannot lose this room," he said. No one answered. Because outside the surgical corridor, movement had already shifted from patrol to assault posture. Federal agents formed a defensive line near the junction. Rifles up. Breathing controlled. Waiting. Evelyn stood a few meters behind them, near a supply alcove. Not hiding. Observing. One of the agents glanced back at her. "You need to move further inside." "No," she said. "That's not a request." "It's a bad position," Evelyn replied calmly. "If you retreat, they control the choke point." The agent hesitated, because she was correct, and he knew it. Another impact hit the surgical door. This time harder. The glass spidered slightly. A warning crack spread across its reinforced surface. Dr. Hale stepped forward. "Open the backup lock," he ordered. A nurse shook her head. "It's already sealed." "Override it." "Manual override requires clearance." "Do it." Evelyn's voice cut in quietly. "Don't." Everyone turned. Even Hale. "If you open that door," she said, "you lose control of entry geometry." "What does that mean?" Hale demanded. "It means they enter on their terms instead of yours." A long silence followed. Another impact hit the door. Closer to failure. The Federal agent spoke into his radio. "We need immediate support at surgical wing." Static answered. No confirmation. No ETA. Only interference. The hospital felt smaller now. Like the walls were closing in. Then the glass door finally gave way. Not fully, but enough. A controlled breach. The frame buckled inward. And the first intruder stepped through. Slow. Measured. Not rushing. Behind him, two more followed. They were not acting like criminals. They were acting like professionals clearing a secured objective. Federal agents immediately opened fire. The corridor erupted in sharp sound. Glass fragments fell across the floor. Medical equipment rattled. A warning siren began somewhere deeper in the hospital but cut off halfway again, as if the system itself was being suppressed. Evelyn moved instantly. Not toward the shooters. Not toward the intruders. Toward the center of the corridor where the surgical access split into two routes. She pointed once. "Evacuate or support staff through West Maintenance Corridor." A nurse hesitated. "That route leads past them." "Not if you leave now." There was no time for argument. People moved. Dr. Hale stayed frozen for half a second, then followed. Because despite everything he believed about protocol, this was no longer protocol. This was survival. Inside the corridor, gunfire echoed again. One Federal agent dropped to a knee after a graze to his shoulder. Another dragged him backward. The intruders advanced slowly under cover fire. They were not reacting. They were pushing forward deliberately. Evelyn watched the pattern. Not panic. Not fear. Assessment. Then she stepped forward into the line of sight between both sides. Immediately, a Federal agent shouted, "Get down!" She ignored it. The lead intruder saw her again. And this time, he stopped firing entirely. So did the others. A strange pause filled the corridor. Gunfire stopped not because of retreat, but because of recognition. The intruder spoke. "We are not here for casualties." His voice was controlled. Professional. "We are here for confirmation access." Evelyn answered quietly. "You will not get it." The intruder's eyes narrowed. "You are not authorized to deny it." A tense silence followed. Dr. Hale, now partially behind cover near a supply cart, whispered, "What is he talking about?" No one answered him, because the answer was standing in the middle of the corridor. Evelyn caught her. The intruder raised his weapon slightly. "Stand down, asset." The word landed differently than everything else. Asset. Not nurse. Not target. Not civilian. The Federal agent nearby froze. "You're an asset?" he asked under his breath. Evelyn did not respond. Because the truth was no longer useful in this moment. Only action was. She stepped sideways again. Not retreating. Repositioning toward the surgical corridor entrance. Blocking direct line of sight 2 or 2. A protective movement. Intentional. The intruder noticed immediately. "You are interfering," he said. "I am preventing collapse of a medical procedure," she replied. "That procedure is secondary." "Not here," Evelyn said. A subtle shift passed through the intruder's formation. They adjusted spacing. Re-evaluating. Because she was not behaving like a nurse. And not like a civilian. She was behaving like someone trained to hold ground under pressure. Behind her, Captain Mercer was being prepared for incision. Dr. Hale looked between the operating room and the corridor. "This is going to turn into a massacre if we don't." Evelyn cut him off without looking back. "Focus on the patient." Another silence. Then she added softly, "Finish the surgery." That command was not medical. It was operational. The federal agent stared at her now differently. Not confusion. Not suspicion. Understanding forming too slowly. The intruder raised his hand slightly. Not to fire. To signal. And the corridor shifted again. His team adjusted positions, preparing for a final push toward the surgical wing. Evelyn inhaled once. Controlled. Measured. Then she spoke into her radio. "Seal secondary surgical corridor." Immediately. A pause. Then compliance from somewhere unseen. Heavy doors began sliding shut behind the intruders, trapping them in a narrowing space. Not fully, but enough to change the engagement geometry. The intruders noticed. Too late to stop it. For the first time, their formation broke slightly, and Evelyn stepped fully into the surgical threshold line. Between them and the operating room. Quiet. Unmoving. The hospital lights flickered overhead. Inside or two, the first incision was about to begin. Outside, the breach had reached its most critical point, and the outcome now depended on whether anyone chose escalation or restraint. The surgical doors sealed behind Dr. Hale with a heavy mechanical lock. Inside or two, the operation on Captain Mercer had begun. Outside, the corridor remained unstable. Gunfire had stopped for the moment, but tension had not eased. It had only shifted into something quieter, more dangerous. Waiting replaced action. Calculation replaced chaos. Evelyn stood at the threshold between both worlds. One side, surgery. One side, breach containment. Neither could fail. The federal agent moved closer to her, keeping his voice low. "You're taking too much control." Evelyn didn't look at him. "I'm maintaining continuity." "That's not your authority." "It is right now." A pause. That answer landed heavier than intended, because no one had countered her yet. Not successfully. Inside the operating room, Dr. Hale's voice came through faint intercom audio. "Bleeding controlled for now. We need 30 uninterrupted minutes." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. 30 minutes. In a controlled hospital, that was routine. Under breach conditions, it was fragile. Too fragile. A nurse approached from behind. "2 ICU patients are still in the West holding area," she said urgently. "We didn't evacuate them fully." Hale's voice crackled through again. "What? They're still there." "We lost contact during the lockdown shift," the nurse replied. Evelyn turned immediately. "Where exactly?" "West ICU corridor. Near ventilation access." The federal agent stepped in. "That area is exposed." "I know," Evelyn said. "That's not a priority." Evelyn finally looked at him. "It is if they can't move themselves." A brief silence followed. Then the agent shook his head. "You can't leave this corridor." Evelyn adjusted her gloves slowly. "I am not leaving the corridor." Another pause. Then she added, "I am extending it." Before anyone could respond, she moved. Not toward or to. Not toward the intruders. Toward the side passage leading into the ICU wing. Dr. Hale's voice came again, sharper now. "Where is she going?" No answer came, because no one in the corridor had authority over that decision anymore. The federal agent followed her immediately. "You're abandoning the surgical perimeter." Evelyn stopped briefly. "No," she said. "I'm stabilizing the network." That's not a military term. It is when you understand systems instead of positions. The ICU corridor was darker. Emergency lighting pulsed faintly overhead. Ventilation fans hummed unevenly, affected by partial system shutdowns. At the far end of the hall, 2 ICU beds had been left near a wall junction during evacuation chaos. Monitors still beeped weakly. One patient was conscious. The other sedated. They were exposed. Completely. Evelyn moved toward them immediately. No hesitation. The federal agent grabbed her wrist. "You go further and you lose the surgical wing." She looked at his hand, then at him. I already accounted for that. A silence. Then she added quietly, they are not the objective. They are the constraint. He released her slowly, because he understood what she meant. Reluctantly. Inside or two, Dr. Hale's voice rose again. We are losing stable pressure. Evelyn didn't respond. She was already repositioning ICU beds, adjusting oxygen lines, checking monitors. The conscious patient looked at her weakly. Are we safe? He asked. Evelyn paused beside him. Not lying. Not promising. You are not in danger from this room, she said. That was the only truth she could give. Outside the ICU corridor, a distant metallic sound echoed again. Movement. Closer. The intruders were shifting. Testing secondary routes now. Evelyn noticed immediately. They are flanking, she said. The federal agent stiffened. How do you know that? Because the pressure on surgical corridor stopped. That meant redistribution, not retreat. Adaptation. She turned toward the ICU exit route. Move them now, she ordered. The nurse hesitated. We don't have clearance. You have seconds, not clearance. For a moment, no one moved. Then the patient bed began rolling. Reluctantly at first. Then faster. Compliance replaced hesitation. A distant echo of footsteps reached the ICU corridor. Not random. Coordinated. Evelyn stepped between the corridor intersection and the ICU exit. Not attacking. Not retreating. Holding position. The federal agent finally spoke again. You keep doing this, placing yourself in front of everything. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Then, it reduces variables. That sounds like sacrifice. No, she said quietly. It sounds like math. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. A shape appeared at the far end of the ICU corridor. Then another. The intruders had found the secondary route. And they were no longer testing. They were advancing. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Inside or two, Mercer's surgery continued. Inside ICU, patients were being evacuated under pressure. And in the corridor between them, she stood alone in the narrowing space where systems either held or collapsed. The lead intruder raised his weapon slightly. Step aside, Carter. Evelyn did not move. Not possible, she replied. A pause. Then the intruder spoke again. This is your last chance to comply. Evelyn looked past him once, calculating distance, timing, structure. Then she answered quietly, I am already complying with a higher priority. The silence that followed was absolute, because everyone understood what that meant, and no one liked the implication. The corridor tightened around them, and the next movement would decide what survived the night. The ICU corridor lights flickered again. Emergency power struggled to maintain consistency as the hospital systems continued to redistribute load under lockdown conditions. Shadows stretched and contracted across the floor with each unstable pulse of light. Evelyn stood at the junction between ICU evacuation and surgical access. Two critical paths, both collapsing in different ways. Behind her, ICU patients were moving out under controlled urgency. Nurses pushed beds carefully through the west exit corridor, guided by federal personnel who were now coordinating evacuation rather than resisting it. Ahead of her, the intruders had fully entered the ICU wing. No longer probing. Now committed. The lead intruder stopped at a distance that felt intentional. He looked at Evelyn for several seconds before speaking. You are obstructing an authorized retrieval. Evelyn's voice remained steady. There is no authorization for entry into a civilian surgical facility. A faint pause. Then the intruder responded. You are still speaking like you belong here. I do belong here, she said. That answer was not emotional. It was procedural. Behind her, Dr. Hale's voice came through the surgical intercom again. Pressure is stabilizing. We are closing the abdominal repair. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Good. Then she opened them again. Because stabilization always created vulnerability elsewhere. The federal agent moved up beside her. "We can extract you and the remaining staff through service exit," he said quietly. Evelyn did not look at him. "That exit is compromised. It's not confirmed. It doesn't need confirmation." Another pause. Then she added, "It's already been mapped." The agent studied her face. For the first time, his confidence wavered slightly. "You've seen this kind of operation before." Evelyn didn't answer. But silence was an answer in itself. The intruder raised his hand slightly. Two of his team moved into flanking positions. Not rushing. Not panicking. Controlled pressure. Professional containment. They were narrowing the corridor deliberately. Forcing choice points. Evelyn noticed immediately. She stepped one pace forward. Not toward them. Toward the center line of the corridor. The exact point where movement decisions became irreversible. The federal agent tightened his grip on his rifle. "Don't go into the open," he said under his breath. Evelyn replied quietly, "I already am." The intruder spoke again. "This does not have to escalate further." Evelyn looked at him. "It already has." A long pause followed. The hospital itself felt suspended between two states, functioning and failing. Behind Evelyn, ICU evacuation continued steadily. Beds disappearing into safer corridors. Ahead of her, armed movement adjusted again. Then the lead intruder said something different. Not a command. Not a threat. A confirmation. "We were told you would resist extraction." Evelyn's expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Recognition of implication. "Extraction," she repeated softly. The word carried weight. Not arrest. Not capture. Extraction implied containment. Control. The federal agent turned toward her immediately. "What does he mean?" Evelyn did not answer him, because answering would collapse too many assumptions at once. Instead, she spoke to the intruder. "You were not sent here for Mercer alone." The intruder paused. That hesitation confirmed it. Dr. Hale's voice crackled again through comms. "We are finishing closure. Preparing transfer out of OR." Evelyn exhaled slowly. The most critical phase was almost complete. But completion also meant exposure. The intruder shifted slightly. "You should have stayed out of this facility." "I am already inside it," she said. "And now you are part of it." That line changed the temperature of the corridor. Because it implied permanence. Not incident. Integration. The federal agent finally stepped closer to her. "Carter," he said carefully. "If that is your name, listen to me." Evelyn did not turn. "I am listening. You need to leave the corridor. Now." "I can't." "Why?" A pause. Then she answered. "Because if I move, they will adjust immediately. And or two will lose coverage." Silence. He looked past her toward the intruders. Then back at her. "You're the only thing holding them back." "Yes." "That's not sustainable." "I know." The honesty of that response made everything heavier. A distant metallic sound echoed from deeper in the ICU wing. The intruders were moving again. Final adjustment. Final push. The lead intruder raised his weapon slightly. Not firing. Signaling. The formation shifted into full breach posture. Evelyn noticed the change instantly. She adjusted her stance slightly, feet aligned, weight balanced, shoulders relaxed but ready. Not aggressive. Prepared. The federal agent noticed too. "You're expecting them to move." "I am expecting inevitability." Another pause. Then, quietly, "And planning around it." Inside or two, Dr. Hale's voice came through again. "Closure complete. We are stabilizing the field." That sentence changed everything. Mercer was no longer in immediate surgical danger. But extraction still required safe passage. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Now she could shift priority. The intruder spoke one final time. "Step aside, Carter." Evelyn looked directly at him now. For the first time fully engaged. "No," she said. One word. Not loud. Not emotional. Absolute. The silence that followed was sharp enough to feel physical. Then the intruder moved. Not rushing. Advancing. And in the same moment, Evelyn shifted forward one step into the corridor center, meeting him halfway. Not as resistance alone, but as control of space itself. The Federal agent raised his weapon slightly behind her. "Last chance," he said under his breath. Evelyn didn't respond, because the moment had already moved past negotiation. It had entered structure, and in that structure, every movement mattered. The corridor narrowed. The distance closed. And the first irreversible action of the final confrontation was about to begin. The corridor fell silent in a way that felt unnatural. Not peaceful. Not resolved. Controlled. The intruders had withdrawn just enough to avoid immediate collapse of the surgical perimeter. Federal teams did not pursue aggressively. Both sides had recalibrated after realizing the cost of escalation inside a functioning hospital would be unacceptable. That left a tense stillness across St. Gabriel Medical Center. Inside or two, the final sutures on Captain Mercer were being completed. Dr. Hale's voice was exhausted when he finally spoke. "He's stable." A long pause followed. Then quieter. "He's going to live." No celebration followed the statement. Only fatigue. Only relief without expression. Evelyn stood near the ICU junction, still watching the corridor where the intruders had been moments earlier. Her posture had not changed since the confrontation ended. The Federal agent approached her slowly. "They withdrew because of you," he said. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. "That's not accurate," she said finally. "They withdrew because their objective changed." The agent frowned. "What objective?" Evelyn looked at him briefly. Containment assessment was completed. Silence followed, because that phrase meant more than anyone wanted to admit. It meant she had been part of the operation from the beginning. Not as a target, but as a variable under observation. Dr. Hale emerged from or two still wearing surgical scrubs, mask hanging loosely around his neck. His eyes moved between exhausted staff, damaged corridors, and Federal personnel still stationed at key points. Then they settled on Evelyn. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, "Who are you?" The question was not aggressive. It was hollow. Evelyn closed a supply kit calmly. "Someone who worked the shift." "That's not an answer." "It is the only one that matters tonight." A hospital administrator approached with a clipboard and shaking hands. "We'll need statements," he said. "Reports for Federal review." The Federal agent stepped in immediately. "There will be a report," he said, "but not one you'll have full access to." The administrator blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you treat tonight as an internal critical incident. Nothing more." Confusion spread across the nearby staff. "But there were armed intruders," someone said. "Yes," the agent replied. "And a lockdown," another added. "Yes." "And Federal involvement." "Yes." "And the nurse." The agent cut in sharply. "That is not part of your report." Silence followed. Evelyn had already moved toward the supply station again. Resetting trays. Restocking equipment. Returning order to a space that had been fractured for hours. Lopez approached quietly. "You saved this place," she said. Evelyn shook her head slightly. "No. I kept it functional." "That's the same thing." "It is not." A long pause. Then Lopez asked carefully, "Why did he salute you?" Evelyn stopped for the first time. Not fully. Just enough to acknowledge the question. "Because he was trained to recognize field authority," she said. "Field authority?" Lopez repeated. Evelyn didn't continue, because continuing would open doors that were better left closed. Across the corridor, Federal personnel began preparing to withdraw their perimeter positions. Their presence faded slowly, like pressure releasing from a sealed system. Dr. Hale watched them go, then looked back at Evelyn again. "You were never a travel nurse, were you?" Evelyn finally met his eyes. "I was assigned here as one." "That's not what I asked." A pause. Then she answered. "I worked where I was needed." That was all she offered. and all she would offer. Near the exit doors, a federal vehicle waited outside in the rain. Engines running. Lights off. The kind of departure that did not invite attention. The agent who had stayed closest to Evelyn spoke quietly. "Captain Mercer asked about you." Evelyn didn't turn. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing." That was correct. He studied her for a moment longer. "People will ask questions. They always do. And answers," Evelyn closed a cabinet gently, "are not always required." The agent nodded slowly, as if accepting something he did not fully understand. Inside the hospital, systems were already returning to normal operation. Lights stabilized. Monitors resumed standard rhythm. Staff began cleaning blood-stained floors and resetting equipment. But something in the building had changed permanently. Not structurally. Perceptually. Because some people now understood that the quiet travel nurse had not been present by accident. And others would spend a long time trying, and failing, to find her in any system afterward. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle by the time dawn approached. St. Gabriel Medical Center looked almost normal again from the outside. Emergency lights had been reset. Police presence had reduced to a distant perimeter. The chaos of the night was being quietly erased by routine morning protocols. Inside, however, nothing felt fully restored. Trauma Bay 1 had been cleaned, but the memory of what happened there remained in the spacing of staff movements. People spoke less, moved more carefully, looked at each other longer than necessary. Evelyn Carter stood alone in the supply room. Her travel bag was already packed. No rush. No hesitation. She folded her scrubs with precise care and placed them on the counter beside the temporary ID badge. Evelyn Carter. Travel RN. She looked at it for a moment. Not sentimental. Just final. A soft knock came at the doorframe. Charge Nurse Lopez stood there, holding a clipboard she wasn't reading. "They said you're leaving before full debrief." "Yes." Lopez hesitated. "That's not standard." Evelyn zipped her bag. "Neither was tonight." A long silence followed. Then Lopez stepped forward slightly. "People are asking questions. They will continue to. About you." Evelyn finally looked at her. "That is expected." Lopez frowned slightly. "You're just going to walk out like nothing happened?" Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag. "Something happened. It is being processed." "That's not what I mean." Evelyn didn't respond. Because meaning was not the problem. Attachment was. Down the hall, Dr. Hale appeared briefly, still in wrinkled scrubs, exhaustion visible in every movement. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hale asked quietly, "Who signs off on you?" Evelyn paused. "No one here." "That's not an answer." "It is the correct one." A heavier silence followed. Hale studied her carefully. "You were not assigned here as a traveler." Evelyn didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She simply said, "My assignment is complete." Hale's voice lowered. "You saved Mercer. I supported his survival." "That's not what the federal agent said." Evelyn adjusted her bag again. Federal agents interpret outcomes differently. A distant ambulance siren passed outside the hospital, cutting through the early morning quiet. Lopez stepped aside slightly. "Are you coming back?" Evelyn looked toward the hallway that led back to Trauma Bay 1. "No." That answer landed cleanly. No ambiguity. No softness. Just closure. Lopez nodded slowly, though she didn't fully accept it. "People will remember you," she said. Evelyn picked up her bag. "No," she corrected gently. "They will remember what happened." She walked toward the exit. No one stopped her. Not because they could not, but because it felt like stopping her would be the wrong kind of interference. At the main hospital doors, she paused briefly. Outside, the city was waking. Cars moving through wet streets. Vendors opening shutters. Life continuing as if nothing had broken through the night. A federal vehicle waited across the street. Engine running. Waiting. The same agent who had stayed closest during the crisis stood near it. He gave a small nod as she approached. "Debrief is incomplete," he said. "It will remain that way," Evelyn replied. A pause. Then he asked, "Will there be another incident like this?" Evelyn looked toward the horizon where the sky was turning pale. "Yes," she said simply. "That's not reassuring. It is not meant to be." She stepped past him toward the sidewalk. No escort. No announcement. No recognition. Just movement away from the place where everything had briefly narrowed down to a single corridor, a single decision, and a single unknown identity no one could fully classify. Behind her, the hospital resumed its ordinary rhythm. Ahead of her, the city continued without pause. And by the time anyone looked for her again in official records, the travel nurse file would already be incomplete. As if she had only ever been there temporarily. Like the badge said. Like the system believed. Like the truth allowed. And then she was gone.